Hello and welcome. I'm Mayor Darcy Paul of the City of Cupertino, and it gives me such tremendous delight to be able to bring to you today Boris Stanley, who is one of the people who was very involved in the beginnings of the technical initiation of the City of Cupertino. Boris was an attorney in Cupertino at around the time that our Chamber of Commerce started in our city, which was a few years prior to when the City of Cupertino itself incorporated. And Boris is a spry young 95 years old. And when I was running for Cupertino City Council in 2014 as the president of the Chamber of Commerce here, I guess that would be right around 60 years after both the Chamber started and the city incorporated. Boris reached out to the Chamber and said, hey, I was really heavily involved in this city at the very beginning, and I was wondering if I can talk to anybody at the Chamber of Commerce. And so that's how Boris and I started a 7-year correspondence and friendship. And so I'm just so very delighted today to be able to bring to the community Boris for a chat with the mayor, which is what I am this year, and am for the second year now. In 2018, I was mayor the first time. And interestingly enough, that was actually the second time that Boris and I met in person. He brought his lovely wife, Isabel, with whom he has had a very spry, I believe, 3-year marriage now. Out
Correct, yes. I've known the lady, though, for about 55 years.
Wow.
She used to work for me.
In Cupertino?
Yeah.
Wow, that's it's quite a history. And so I'd love to delve into your experiences here. But let me start by thanking you for being here, because we've had a lot of opportunities to bring the community together to recognize your contributions to the beginning. And also, on a minor note, earlier this week when you first came here, we were able to give you a van tour of Cupertino. And so that was quite nice, because our city hall needs the capacity to be able to show people around the city. And hopefully the tour was perhaps not as unexpected as it would have been, say, 5 or 6 years ago when you had first revisited Cupertino after many decades away. But hopefully the van tour worked out pretty well for what your expectations were, and it was enjoyable.
Well, it was so impressive that it was beyond comprehension to try to compare what happened 66 years ago and what exists now. Then it was a sleepy community, fairly disparate in interests, farming interests, small business people, things of that kind. But physically, of course, there's no comparison. It's really a tribute to the present city council and those that came before them for years and years and years. And that's when the heavy lifting, as I mentioned, I like to think of myself as the midwife for Cupertino. However, as a midwife, that obligation really ceases right after birth. And that was pretty much what happened here, although there were other reasons why I didn't get further involved as time went on. I opened another office and so on. But so far as the city itself is concerned, I hope it never gets any bigger, which is maybe impossible. It seems to me big enough to be sophisticated and still interesting without being suffocating. There physically, I was unable to identify anything by physically looking at a street, a name, a building, because they're all changed. And it's impressive, and the comparison, if you want to make it with parenthood, it's, when you're a parent, birth is one challenge, but trying to bring up a child in this world particularly, I guess at any time, has its challenges for many years to come. And that's pretty much what Cupertino faced, because it was, in my office, for example, it was a shack. There was a butcher shop in the back. The owner had a wholesale butcher shop. He supplied the growers around here. There were no signs. I'm on Stevens Creek Boulevard, right? And I'm just off of what used to be Highway 9, De Anza Boulevard, just a few hundred yards. And it's dirt, there's no curbs, and the asphalt is missing. And one way in which we found that somebody was coming for an appointment is the dust would sift through the front door. So, but seriously, insofar as my, going on to a question you haven't asked, but so far as my participation here, I think it's fortuitous. I was a young guy in my 20s and middle 20s, and I just had a couple of years in a large farming county, and I was second in command there. Decided after some time and into the second year that I wanted to get into private practice. The bureaucracy of county government, the politicization of so many things was not attractive. I wanted to be practicing law. And also, coincidentally, we had just indicted the district attorney for corruption. And depending on where your sympathies lie, if he got indicted, it's one thing and successfully prosecuted, but if he didn't, you've lost your job. So anyway, I decided to pick up my little family, rent a truck, and come to Silicon Valley. I was born in San Francisco, so this area is kind of my hometown.
Yeah, tell us a little bit.
I really feel Cupertino is.
Sure. Yeah, no, tell us a little bit about your background, and you have gone over what brought you to Cupertino. So you were originally, you're saying, in a farming, more of an agrarian community, but it sounded like more in a law firm type of context, or working in more of the larger impersonal kind of, sort of industry, location. And, I can say that I very much relate with what you're describing, having come from, also a very esteemed educational institution on the other coast, right? You're a Stanford law grad, I'm a Harvard law grad. And what we ended up doing was going to Manhattan to work corporate work, right, in order to pay off our loans. But I had a very similar kind of, enlightenment, right? Because it was a matter of, for me, running for city council in 2009 and realizing that I wanted a little bit more out of, professional life and career than simply sort of being part of the chop shop experience of, just trying to churn out as much work as possible and bill as much. So, I've always felt, ever since we met, an affinity for your experience. So it seems like you've captured that really quite nicely in terms of that parallel. But I also think about a lot of the different areas of Cupertino and the different people in Cupertino. And I want to thank you as well for the opportunity to be able to explore something that I've been thinking about bringing forth to the community for a long time, which is essentially, hey, tell us your story. Tell us how you got here. How did your family get here? Because we really come from a lot of different perspectives, don't we? So tell us a little bit about what brought Boris Stanley to Cupertino ultimately. It does sound like...
well, that question isn't too difficult, but you mean you're asking an attorney to brag about himself and his background?
It's an open-ended question.
Yeah, well, I was first in my class, I did all this kind of thing, got a scholarship to Stanford, and
so you
essentially, the question you're asking is something of my background.
Yeah, what was your background? You said you were born in San Francisco, I believe?
I was what?
You were born in the area?
San Francisco.
Okay.
San Francisco. But I lived in Southern California for quite a while. Just as the war started, we went to Seattle. I had an uncle that was more or less my support. I lost my dad when I was 12, and my mother kind of had other plans. So I had a step-uncle, you might say, and he's an aeronautical engineer and had an opportunity to go to Seattle. So I had spent my high school time there, got a wonderful education there in a high school, Broadway High School. Doesn't exist anymore, it's gone. But there's a thing that maybe you gals would appreciate. The teachers were spinsters, they were not allowed to be married. But as a consequence, I feel that you have to be pretty dedicated in order to give that up, I think, for a gal to give that up. And they were dedicated, and I got a fantastic education. So good that a few of us in the senior year were able to take professorial courses from the University of Washington professors. So that was a good break for me. At 17, the war was a couple of years in, and I decided I wanted to join, but I did needed parental consent, which I got without any trouble, and joined the Naval Air Corps, and got a medical discharge because of reasons that aren't important, and turned around and joined the regular Navy. And so I was in the regular Navy for 3 years in the Pacific Theater. After that, I took advantage of the scholarship I had to Stanford, as well as the GI Bill. I had other plans as to what I wanted to do as my future, but the disciplines in those days were engineering, medicine, law, and so on. And so you felt you always had to go to one of those, and you changed your mind. And I did. I was a sonar officer, radar and sonar, and what they call a 90-day wonder. I didn't go to Annapolis or anything else, but apparently had sufficient qualifications on examination to go to a college in Chicago for a short time after my Great Lakes sojourn in boot camp. And so I was a pretty young officer at that time, but I was I was on a destroyer escort and on several. So after that service, I went to Stanford immediately and went straight through summer. There was an opportunity to do that, especially in your undergraduate years. It was a little more difficult in your senior years. And so I had 7 academic years there. After that, went to, I want to point out too, that might be of interest anecdotally. In my high school, it was really highly rated, even for Seattle, academically, and their teaching corps. And we had a substantial Japanese population, also Chinese population, but mainly Japanese.
Was this in Seattle?
Pardon?
This was in Seattle?
Yeah, this was in Seattle. Okay. And the reason I think it's distinctive is because they were great students. Now, not ethically, because you're one thing or another doesn't make you a great student, but they applied themselves, which oftentimes is not the case with some of the rest of us. They had to go to school on Saturdays and keep up with their ethnic background and language. And it was uncomfortable when the war broke out because they were being relocated. And you played football with them, and you had various things you did with them intimately. And youngsters, and I consider that a youngster in high school, we accommodate to that much easier than when we were adults, I think. And when you're socially interchanging all the time, you never thought of ethnicity or color or anything. At least I didn't. And I come from a background where my forebears were executed by people who thought they had a better system.
Where was that?
Well, they're in Russia.
They're Russian, okay.
Yeah, my mother was German and French, and during Peter the Great's time, they were giving away land in Russia because Russia was so far behind in its development in the modern world. So as a consequence, her family, a century or two ago, went to Russia. My dad was in commercial. He was a Russian in a way, although I have reason to believe that because of geographic location, that maybe we have some relationship to Genghis Khan.
Well,
put that in your bonnet.
There's a few generations, so yeah, interesting.
So that was my background, and they in order to escape the communist revolutionaries, they had to go east, and that meant through Siberia. And they actually were in China a while. They didn't know each other, but they were in China for a while. Ended up finally in the Philippines, and because it's an American protectorate, the president at that time said, let's make them political refugees. So he sent some transports over, I think 3 Army transports, 550 what they call politically white Russians. And then my folks met on the ships. So that's why I was born in San Francisco and not New York. We lived there for a short time. Anyway, as far as my career is concerned, after I went to Stanford, and I immediately got a job in the county down in Central California, and was there a couple of years. And to give you a little anecdote about the experience there, you did everything except you didn't have to do the floors and pull out the garbage, but everything else you doubled in spades. I had magistrate experience as a result of when there's a criminal activity that the government is concentrating on. There are two ways to go: with a grand jury or by information. And the information process requires some additional check before they bind you over to Superior Court, and in this case, a Superior Court for trial, because they don't want somebody for, the district attorney is a political job, and you're elected to it, you're not appointed to it, so they don't want that used as a hammer for enemies. Anyway, I had the experience of hearing cases to find out that there was sufficient cause to bind them over to Superior Court for trial. I also, bill collector, California has a personal property tax. In the county that I was in, they had some mining, and the mining equipment is expensive, and it's cumbersome. But people weren't paying their taxes. So I decided they should. As a consequence, and they were all over the country, the people that owned it, they just didn't pay their personal property taxes. And it's not a recorded instrument like a piece of real property, so you can't lien it. So they sent me out, but we were in NRA country, but they sent me in a sheriff's car. And the gentleman that was driving it was near retirement, and I thought to myself, there's a guy that's pushing 60, and he's going to protect me. And we're going down these roads 60 or 70 miles an hour to go in the hills where the mining is, and he's going like this and talking to me back there. Anyway, I thought, that old guy is going to protect me. Now I look back, and I think that's pretty young. So anyway, I had a plethora of experience there, and I had enough after the 2 years.
That's interesting.
Came to this area here. We found a place that was inexpensive and that was really closer to Cupertino than Sunnyvale, but it's just off Highway 9, a little bit north of downtown at that time. And I was in this community looking around, and I said, gee, there's no lawyers that have an office. There are a lot of lawyers that live here, but they were in San Jose. So I thought, how about this? And found this shack and told you about the butcher shop and so on. And so let's stop there. That's about the background.
That's great. So let's get this timeline going. So you served in the military, served in World War II, came back and finished your degrees at Stanford, and then you found yourself in which county was it in California?
Tulare County.
Tulare. Okay, so you were in Tulare for a couple of years, and then you moved over to this area, to young Cupertino, I take it in the late 1950s?
1953.
Okay, sort of early to mid 1950s. And I know for a fact right around that time is when the Chamber of Commerce incorporated, so it sounds like you didn't waste any time. You found that office in the back of the butcher shop. And just for reference, you said that you found a pretty affordable house. Do you remember how much you paid for it?
For what?
For the home that you moved into when you first moved to this area?
Well, the home that I bought through the GI Bill it was in Santa Clara.
Okay, and about how much was that?
But that was further on downstream.
I see.
Well, go ahead with your question. I'll be.
Oh well, either
digressing.
way, the GI Bill bought home, or perhaps did you buy a home right when you moved here, or were you renting?
Well, soon thereafter, $1,000 did it, and I bought a $10,000 home.
Okay.
Wow. And I also, by the way, benefited educationally because the state of California, even though I had graduated from a high school in Seattle and all that. I was born here, so they gave you an additional stipend simply because you were born here and you're a veteran, so that helped. As a matter of fact, in my senior, it did more than help. In my senior year in law school, financially, I was right at the edge, and for any further support or help, and that $1,000 made a hell of a difference in those days.
I can imagine, yes.
Made a big difference in those days.
So what were you paying for your office in the back of the
$30 a month.
$30
I remember that.
Okay. Yeah,
I wish I'd owned that property and kept it. I see the bank, or some kind of bank is there now.
Okay, so that helps to place that corner. A brick building, a bank is there right now, it sounds like. So, it does seem like you didn't waste any time. You came into Cupertino, you have the $30 monthly rent office in the back of the butcher shop. People are coming in by the dust coming under the door when they open it up. And
that's actually true.
Well, I'm sure. A lot of these memories come back, right? I mean, it's really quite striking. And so I take it you probably started immediately meeting some of the owners of local businesses. Tell us a little bit about that community when you first came into here, because of course Cupertino at that time wasn't yet the city of Cupertino.
I had a secret formula for my success. I had a good geographic location. I had the secretary I ended up with. I was very, very, very fussy about it, and I paid a few bucks more just to do that. And I had the greatest invention at that time, an IBM typewriter. Plus, you got my talent. And the combination of those put me in a position where I had the mechanical, logistical, minor support as it were, but nevertheless support. And when the Chamber of Commerce, they called themselves that, but they weren't incorporated, they weren't organized, they weren't connected with the national organization. They didn't have that input and support from national organizations and from other chambers. Mm-hmm. So I said, you ought to incorporate, become official, have a Secretary of State, and also be approved for membership nationally. So I drew up the papers, the articles, the bylaws. And by the way, the city owes me $80
for the city.
As I remember, that's the filing fee.
Right. Well, fair enough. Well, let's get to that.
No, let's not forget that $80.
Yeah, let's get to that. Let's get to that. So it's interesting. I've spoken to members of our historical society, right, and they do point out that there was an incorporation committee for the city of Cupertino. So I'd like to. There
were several actually. Go ahead.
Okay, that's good to know. So I'd like to get some of your thoughts about that. And someone pointed out to me recently, well, when we pulled the incorporation papers for the city of Cupertino, where's Boris Stanley's signature? And I say to them,
there are no incorporation papers.
There were no incorporation papers. Okay.
No. What?
Well,
go ahead.
But let me kind of give some context. But it did sound like you moved here and immediately you were able to formally get what was called the Chamber of Commerce recognized as an organization. But it sounds to me like you really were able to, as one of the very few resources for legal help and advice, and maybe you were the only one, in fact, use that experience and expertise a couple of very brief years later to help with the legal background of how you get a city formally recognized, such as Cupertino. So wondering if you'd like to speak to that as well. So you've got the various incorporation committees. You've got your specific role in terms of how our fair city came to legally come into existence.
There are several questions in your questioning. As far as the chamber was concerned, I've kind of addressed that. As far as the incorporation concerned, the vital problem as I saw it then was everybody talking a lot about it, nobody's doing anything. Mm-hmm. And we had the farmers that had their own, you might say, committee that were addressing that. We had the business people that were doing it to a certain extent. And we had a couple of the Monte Vista people also on their own who were investigating it. But while they were doing that, Rome was burning because Sunnyvale, San Jose, Santa Clara put out their tentacles of annexation. And early on, it was legal to make annexations based on what they call strip annexation. They take a road, and then they cherry pick areas that they thought they would want to have so far as part of their city, and they'd take the prime parts of that acquisition. And there's no vote or anything necessary because nobody lives on the street. They soon realized, the state legislature found that that's really a bad situation.
Sure.
But the thing is, there were still, besides the strip annexations, there were still legitimate annexation activities from Sunnyvale, Santa Clara, and San Jose. Saratoga wasn't doing much in that regard, but they were all there. And I said to myself, as an attorney, what do you do? The first thing that occurs to me is go to court. You know, the trouble with that is, first of all, it's expensive, probably indecisive, and time-consuming, and may not do the job because you'd have to have restraining orders, they'd have to be generated, they'd have to give a chance for a response from the cities. I mean, that is just a nightmare. Then I discovered through research that one thing you can do is you get a petition by property owners that you have to have a legal description and so on. But when you file that petition, that stops everything. That stops everything involved in that legal description.
That stops all the annexation efforts.
It stops the annexation.
Great.
And I thought, my God, that's the way to go. But then, you know, you got to execute. How are you going to get, you can't just go out and say, hey, guys, sign this petition.
Of course.
So you've got to go, you got to prepare it. That's my IBM typewriter.
Sure.
You got to circulate it. And that was done through, you know, there's no emails and things like that in those days. So that had to be physically done, and I employed members of the chamber and people, and there were other people involved in this too that were interested. Like I said, Monte Vista had its deal, and I think it was the farmers that started to get research on the viability financially of incorporation. They had the Cora Foundation do a survey, and I looked at that. I got the benefit of that.
I'm sorry, did you say the D'Oro Foundation?
Cora.
The Cora Foundation,
Yeah.
Got it.
And I'm pretty sure. Anyway, I had the. But what bothered me, not that I'm a great analyst on finances, but I was afraid that what they had was too small and not financially viable as a city. And I attempted then to, by publication, and I got to give credit to one person, Bill Norton, who was the publisher of the Cupertino Courier in those days, a nice, affable guy.
Let me ask you really quickly.
Don't interrupt, I got to go finish
okay,
this.
you finish all right.
So now you've lost my train of thought.
Well,
go ahead.
Perfect.
Go ahead with the question.
Tell me, was the Mercury News in existence at the time as well?
Yeah, but it's not a friendly publication.
Okay.
Yeah, but they did cover it, you know, but not too much. The after the election, after the successful creation of the city,
sure.
There was coverage. But beforehand, it was a third cousin so far as coverage is concerned. And also, you have to understand that this was not in any way. There were no uniting chords in the community. Every small businessman was trying to get ahead, and he was not really concerned about incorporation too much, and he didn't have the time. And getting back to the chamber, I was the first president. Actually, I was the de facto president for a number of years because I was there and people knew me. I was acquainted downtown because of my legal appearances there so often, and to the Board of Supervisors. I was on a first-name basis with Paul Teal, who was the county clerk. Things like that promoted things that otherwise would have been cumbersome for anybody else to have handled. I was known, even in that short time that I was there. And also, the first, I served for a short time officially, de jure, as attorneys like to call it, but I didn't have the time to devote to going to meetings, and which sometimes are just ceremonial, you know.
Oh, I hear you.
I don't have that kind of time.
Completely understood.
And I'm a one-man operation. The first guy that volunteered to take my place was immediately transferred to San Francisco. He worked for Chevrolet on a regional basis. He wasn't a salesman or anything, but
sure.
So he lost his position here and he disappeared. And we had a couple of others. We even had some stationery printed with somebody's name on it, never served. So, there wasn't any cohesive, organized deal, and there were no paid employees. In fact, there were no employees. And everybody was kind of going their own way. Everybody was flying by the seat of their pants when it came to that thing.
But I think it's fair. It does sound like, as you're recollecting it, you were able to look at the insight and go, hey, look, if you really want to stop the annexation monster, right? I mean, one surefire way to do it is just to start initiating incorporation attempts. And so it does sound like a number of signatures had to be gathered. And I would also say
2,200.
About 200?
2,200.
Oh, 2,200, okay. Yes,
and I was the notary public.
You were notary
because
public.
They had to be under oath. You
Right,
had to determine that they were residents of that area and so on.
Okay, so you had to notarize.
Well, I sent you the paper that has my name all over it several times, where I was the notary public. So I doubled in spades. Go ahead.
A lot of good effort there. In fact, when people here are trying to get a voter initiative happening, we no longer need to notarize every signature. Those go over to the county now, and the registrar of voters office verifies those signatures.
Well, that still occurred.
Yeah.
They still had to do the verification, but I didn't want a bunch of signatures that were going to float.
Right.
So you had to be careful, and
that's a lot of work. I certainly salute you.
Well, I wasn't alone in that. I obviously, physically, I wouldn't. I don't care. You couldn't have covered the bases for 2,200 people.
Oh my goodness, I tell you.
But
it's a lot of work though, and a lot of coordination. It sounds like it's interesting. You were pointing out that there were kind of incorporation committees here and there, right? And perhaps they represented different...
Well, and that was a problem more than a help, because everybody had their own ideas of what they wanted to do with the city, and they got ahead of themselves because they don't have a city yet. But, a farmer has his interests. Let's keep the tax base low. Let's give us the green belting so that we can have lower taxes. The businessman says, hey, I can't afford it. House owner says, I don't want it. I mean, that was the biggest opposition, actually. You could have if it's at least 10,000 square foot home, you didn't have to have a sewer, so you could have a septic tank. And he didn't want a sewer. He doesn't want sidewalks, and he doesn't want the city. You had the bureaucracy, you had the taxes, you had more regulation. So those were counterintuitive or counterproductive so far as getting incorporation. And as a matter of fact, I realized shortly before the election occurred that we better have a town hall meeting and let everybody vent their spleen.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah,
that sounds really interesting.
It was, for one thing, I really had no authority to do anything. I mean, I was doing it.
Sure.
Nobody said, Boris, go out and find somebody and do this. But I said to myself, who in the area is apolitical? Someone that you're not going to get excited about. And I thought of the superintendent of schools.
Okay.
A gentleman by the name of Daryl Sedgwick, really a nice guy. I thought he was a perfect person for it.
Sedgwick, you said, was his last name.
Well, as it turned out, it was almost critically a bad choice.
Oh, really?
For the reason that he's just what he is, affable. When we got into the town meeting, which was held at Homestead High School, and it was overpacked, the vociferous opponents were vociferous. And poor Daryl, that isn't his area of expertise. He couldn't handle a crowd.
Interesting.
So this may seem immodest, but I have affirmation of it.
Sure.
I got up and took over. I have been in a number of situations, even in those young years, say in bankruptcy proceedings where it's really hot, and you have people that are going to be discharged from bankruptcy and they owe a lot of money, and so it's pretty heated. So I've had that. Plus, I have had because I was a member of various community things, public speaking ability. But I got up anyway, and I started saying, look, let's settle down and let's just evaluate this and blah, blah. You're going to have taxes, regulation, bureaucracy, but you're going to have self-government. Self-government. You're going to be able to determine where your taxes go. When they tax you for city purposes, they go for city purposes. So think about that. Do you really want to be at the mercy of somebody in San Jose telling you what to do when their priorities are in San Jose? So I went along those lines, but kept talking quietly, and it subdued the thing. I had the fortitude because of my experience on a county level, and also I was in the city attorney's office in South San Francisco for a short time before I opened my office.
Oh, interesting.
So I was familiar with the League of California Cities, and I managed to talk them into sending their general counsel. He said, well, listen, we're not political. We don't want to be in this kind of thing. And I said, look, what I want you to be able to do is factually state anything. People are saying this is going to cost you $100 for every $1,000 valuation, or it's going to cost you 10 cents. I said, all I want you to do is when it comes to a fact, straighten it out. Stand up, or I'll ask you, and I'll control the meeting so they don't ask you questions that get you in the political part of it, so that we can be speaking from somebody with experience, has no axe to grind. Anyway, he finally just said, I'll come on those bases if you guarantee that control. So he showed up, and it was just his appearance there was helpful. And the few times that I had to refer to him to buttress an argument factually was helpful. And as a consequence, and I'm tooting my own horn afterwards, a couple of us on the committee, incorporation committee, went to the local water hole, and it was close to midnight, or late, and this general counsel was in the car, and he turned to me and he said, Boris, but for you, I think this thing got gone in the tank. Now that's an overstatement, there's no question about that, but if you'd waited much longer to incorporate in any situation, particularly in Cupertino, you'd have to question viability financially because you'd have less geography.
Sure.
And I managed just before election too to get, as a matter of fact, that picture of me with Warner Wilson and Don Banley.
Yes.
Shows me looking at an expanded picture of the area to be incorporated.
Right. And
financially, that was crucial. So that happened, which was beneficial. But he said, but for that, incorporation may not have occurred, who knows? But the thing is, if it was delayed, that could have been crucial. Because despite the fact that I think I did an awful lot during that time, it takes everybody, and it's going to take the people,
sure.
To come be. In the last analysis, they're the ones that are going to have to decide. Otherwise, you don't have anything. So, was it a perfect storm? Maybe so. But was I in the middle of it? I suppose so. And that's the reason I think the saying that I'm the midwife of Cupertino, I think is apropos, because my job kind of stopped at the delivery time, and then you guys took over, meaning you're councilman, and for 66 years I didn't care for the first councilman that were elected, even though they were most of my clients.
Sure.
That's democracy.
So why don't you think they made you the city attorney at that time, if you're like the attorney?
There are two things that were vital professionally. One was a civil engineer to do the legal description, and one was an attorney to do that part of it, the petition and so on. That was me. And I got an outfit that I'd used professionally, civil engineers, to pro bono do the work. And that was a lot of work. A lot of work to do the legal description. So when the election was over and the council was there, I never heard another word from anybody. But I sent a letter, indicated very briefly my background with the county and with the South San Francisco city. Didn't mean that they passed a resolution saying that anybody who's a city attorney, among a few other jobs, had to live physically in Cupertino, which I do not take any issue with. I can see that. Today, I don't know whether that's a good criterion or not, really, because if you restrict your talent as to where they live, you may be making the pool small. Anyway, so what did they do? They appointed an attorney that was a friend of one of the councilmen who lived and practiced in San Francisco. And that ticked me off. And frankly, if they gave me the job, I think it would have been a disadvantage to my career. Because it would have taken so much time for a new city. You'd be babysitting them on every aspect of it until, there's no experience there at all. There's no familiarity with any of the state statutes. And
Sure.
California is pretty well regulated in that regard. So I doubt if I would have lasted. But the other thing is I got out of that milieu by leaving Tulare County. Why do I want to get into it? But nevertheless, it hurt. It hurt, and that's why I'm so thankful that in my waning years, they're recognizing what I did, and they were quick to take advantage of me. Look, you got somebody who's working for nothing, you got somebody who's reasonably competent, and you got somebody that hasn't got any leverage with anything or anybody. So he can't make trouble for you.
How did they manage to rope you into this work in the first place?
How did they what?
How did they manage to rope you into this work in the first place?
They didn't.
You just
I did
it of yourself.
Why I did it, there's no explanation. I suppose I must have thought, career-wise, it's to get involved and be exposed, since I didn't live in Cupertino and I wasn't born in Cupertino, hadn't any history with Cupertino. That is also being a creator of the formal Chamber of Commerce. There was they called themselves the Chamber of Commerce, but they weren't formalized. I think there was an impetus created there, but I can't honestly tell you why. If I can use the expression, seized the reins and started to do all of what I have been describing. First of all, I'm a believer that attorneys have a couple of obligations that aren't in the law books. One is ethics.
Sure.
And the other one's public service.
You've got civil service.
And that's one thing Stanford taught. I don't know if they teach that anymore. I doubt it, because I've had occasion to hire some attorneys. I'm disappointed, but let's not get into that. I can't, as to how and why, how I know, but why. I was in the middle of it. And listen, I'm not kidding. Geographically, as I said, I have an office and I have a secretary and an IBM
Sure,
machine.
and an IBM typewriter, right?
Yeah. And I knew my way around.
Sure. That really does comport with what I've read. I read a Cupertino Courier article, and it was quoting you. You're kind of the young hotshot attorney in town, and a lot of ideas, full of vim and vigor, and you can see that.
Excuse me, that's a disadvantage in that environment in Cupertino 66 years ago. Hotshot is not a good word back then.
Well,
but go ahead.
It's interesting. It's interesting that you say that. I think in a lot of these kind of high functioning environments, there's sort of a social regulation that takes place, right? You really do need to take people down.
Yes.
And so that's. But what I was saying is that you really did see kind of that sense of civic optimism coming off the page when the Courier was quoting what you were saying, some of the ideas that you had, and I can very much see why that translated into, hey, we've got this interest. I have civic conscientiousness. I'm going to do this, and go forward with it. But then, of course, you run into, as all of us do, some practical walls. I've got to provide for my family. Perhaps I want to, get a larger home. They're just very real kinds of, things that you have to do and steward to, when you're relatively
If I can
young,
invent an analogy, though,
Sure.
What I really feel was going on is somebody in the middle of the Pacific Ocean that is going to drown if they don't swim. They started swimming, but they didn't know where they were going.
And you just have to help, right?
So you just keep swimming, and I think that's what happened there. People were worried about what was happening so far as encroachment from other cities, the lack of being able to adjust your future accordingly. And I guess there was an affinity to Cupertino, I think by living in an area, growing there, and being born there, that you do feel kind of defensive when somebody's intruding with interests that aren't yours. So it was a malleable mass that existed in Cupertino. As I said, there were several groups that are working towards this, because it seemed like I better keep swimming and get incorporation and protection, because I don't see any other way to go.
No worries. So Maybe it was said in facetiousness, but let's revisit that $80 that our city owes you. Was that something that was part of the
fees?
fee?
That's a filing fee for the Secretary of State. Yeah, it was pretty cheap in those days.
Okay, very
Well, also, I think there was a special rate because the Chamber of Commerce is not a commercial enterprise per se.
Right.
Per se, but say, by the way, I've been on since we've been talking some months ago. You put me on the mailing list with the Chamber.
Sure.
I'm really impressed with what they're doing. I mean, that is so much over what we were capable of even thinking about.
Well, a lot of it's
we had
technology.
a contest for a beauty queen of the year or whatever it was. We did that, and we had some strange applicants.
Well,
I'm almost tempted to name the name.
Let me stop you there. I mean, I think suffice it to say, it doesn't matter where we're at. We can all help each other in various, capacities. And, I think even the youngest person can show us some wisdom. And sometimes, and I'm not directing this at you, the eldest among us may, show some petulance in some respects, right? And so, I really think that it's quite redeeming. And I thank you for all that you've done on behalf of our community, on behalf of the city of Cupertino, everything that you've done, not just in the time of incorporation, but coming back and reaching back out and, taking an interest in what has happened to this city that you did help midwife into its incipient years. So, Boris, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. For all of the people watching this in our community and perhaps abroad, we thank you very much. Hopefully this turns into the initiation of a series of conversations. I thought this was very illuminating personally, and you're always welcome in Cupertino. Know that you have a special place in the heart of our city.
Well, thank you for the questions. And it helps a lot of times to just get it off your chest, if you want to put it that way. I haven't reminisced like this for so long that thank you for the questions, Darcy. And by the way, not to be commercial about it, but thank you for what you've done this week, and the council and the people that have contributed the time and effort and attendance. It's been enjoyable.
Thank you.
And I'm glad I made the effort because with my wife, who is not as mobile as I am and so on, it was a question of whether we could make it and whether we'd be able to handle it. And it's been close, but we managed to do it. So with the help of people like where we're staying. So anyway, thank you too. Thank
Absolutely.
you too.
Well, let's end this with a COVID era fist bump. We've been keeping our social distance.
Okay.
But thank you very much, Boris.
All right.
All right. Take care.
Thank you. You too.